Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses. I've really enjoyed this hearing on what I think is a critically important topic. Mr. Straub, you in your testimony had some pretty strong words about the need for responsible space traffic management. And when we think about the fact that we're transitioning to an environment of thousands of new satellites being launched every year, the need for that management becomes pretty clear. And I also found it compelling that Ms. Azakar was talking about the collision in 2009 between an Iridium satellite and a Russian satellite. That's going to become more and more prevalent if we don't get this problem under control. Obviously, we're going to have a growing need for the Office of Space Commerce to take up some of the slack there, but it's been pointed out that this is going to require international cooperation because we're not the only ones who are launching satellites. So could you walk us through how you see that problem being solved and where the different responsibilities are going to lie when we do get it solved?
Yes, thank you for the question, and it's an extremely important issue. I would recommend that we start by funding the TRACS program, moving forward with implementation of it, and then starting to work with allied nations to be able to utilize what information that we've gathered, shared it with them, and to expand it on a global basis. There have been discussions about whether this should be done on a global basis, an international basis, starting with the ITU, and there's a great fear within the industry that it will take far too long to implement a global basis, a global system, and therefore we need to start with implementing something in the United States. We spent over 10 years trying to identify which civil agency was going to take on this role. Fortunately, we've identified the Office of Space Commerce as the one to do so, but in order for them to be successful, we need to fund the TRACS program.
And do you see a role for automated decision-making through technologies like artificial intelligence in solving this problem? Because it seems like a problem that AI would be very good at solving. And obviously, you'd prefer to solve the problem ahead of time, but if you had an autonomous system that was continuously monitoring it, you might be able to avert a collision at the last second if, that it occurred through a human error. Is that something that might be possible?
I think there's absolutely a role for AI to be able to help address the issue. Some of the conjunctions can be addressed by onboard decisions within spacecraft, but ultimately we need to know where each of the different objects in space are.
Thank you. Mr. Goyle, I was really interested in the different principles that you laid out in your testimony, and two of the principles in particular are principles that were echoed by other members here of the panel. The frustration with long licensing timelines, and you had some pretty poignant examples of the consequences of those licensing timelines, but you also highlighted the need to leave room for careful technical review, particularly as the use of these satellite technologies becomes more diverse. But I mean, obviously those two ideas are in tension. We can't complain simultaneously about needing to do a more detailed technical review. At the same time, we're complaining about the fact that the licensing timelines are too long. So how do we balance the need to do both of those things at the same time?
Thank you, Congressman. I take the point, and I think balance is the right word and is hard to achieve. The bill as drafted now has tolling provisions which allow the FCC under some circumstances to extend the timeline and places accountability checks on the FCC's ability to extend so they can't just do it willy-nilly. I think that's the right approach. Most market participants can look at this bill and say, I'm still going to get a license in time. It might not be 12 months if I'm proposing something really novel, but even if there's an extension, there are limits on it. So, but achieving that is critical because what's the alternative, right? If the FCC can't pull the trigger because something's too complicated, they haven't run the traps, they're going to deny applications. And, I don't think that helps anybody. I think it's particularly damaging to smaller companies whose investors, whose customers are suddenly going to say the FCC isn't buying what you're selling. So there's got to be that balance. And, I think tolling and similar safety valves are the way to go.
Right. Well, I agree with you. I also think that if we examine the reason for the long licensing timelines now, the reason why those timelines are unreasonably long is not that there is a too thorough technical review going on. So I do think that there's room there to accomplish both of those goals, but I appreciate your perspective. I see my time's expired. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.